Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we have a really fascinating stack of sources in front of us.
Yeah, we've got a lot of ground to cover with these.
We really do. We are looking at federal census data from the 1940s, some incredible labor history monographs detailing the industrial boom of World War II, and some really striking oral histories.
Right. Those oral histories from mid-century factory workers are just, well, they're incredibly vivid.
They are. And we also have this particularly wild 1953 sociology survey from Wayne State University that we will definitely get into.
Well, that survey is a huge piece of the puzzle here.
It really is. So our mission for this deep dive is to use these documents to unpack a massive, yet honestly frequently overlooked internal migration, one that fundamentally rewired the cultural and industrial map of America.
Yeah, and we're going to explore the really bruising reception these migrants faced from their new urban neighbors.
Exactly. Because there is this deep paradox at the heart of this movement, right? What happens when millions of people are desperately wanted as workers, but openly despised as neighbors?
It's a crazy contradiction.
Yeah.
And, the scale of this demographic shift is just staggering when you look at the raw census figures.
I mean, how many people are we actually talking about here?
Well, between 1940 and 1970, roughly 7 million people left the southern uplands.
7 million. That is just a massive amount of humanity.
It really is. We are talking about the Appalachian Mountains, the hollows of Kentucky, West Virginia, Tennessee, and the Carolinas.
Right, and they moved out of those rural mountainous regions and relocated directly into the industrial heartland of the American North.
Straight into the cities.
So I want to frame this for you listening because it is so easy to hear a number like 7 million people and just process it as a dry historical statistic.
Yeah, it just washes over you.
Exactly. But we are talking about the sudden, totally chaotic birth of a brand new urban working class here.
Absolutely. These were individuals and families forged in the fires of wartime factories.
But simultaneously, they found themselves pushed up against intense daily class prejudice in their very own neighborhoods.
Right, which we will dig into deeply. But to understand the friction that happened in cities like Detroit, Chicago, and Akron, we first have to look at the push factors.
Right, the mechanics of the desperation that forced millions of people out of their ancestral homes in the first place.
Because people don't just leave their homes by the millions on a whim,
Yeah.
right? The sources point to a failing rural economy, specifically in the Appalachian coal fields.
But it wasn't just, like, a random economic downturn, was it?
No, not at all. The labor histories were reviewing detail a very specific, brutal industrial transformation happening in the 1930s and early 1940s.
Right, because the Appalachian coal fields had been the main economic engine for families there for generations.
Yeah, and the extraction of that coal relied almost entirely on human muscle.
Like literally guys with pickaxes.
Exactly. Men using pickaxes, shovels, explosives, just manually raking the coal from the seam and loading it into carts.
But then something changed during this period. The mining companies introduced something called continuous miner machines.
Yeah, and this changes everything.
So let's break down the mechanics of that, because the transition from muscle to machine is basically the engine of this whole displacement.
Right, because a continuous miner isn't just a slightly better shovel.
No, it's a monster. From the sources, it's this massive, multi-ton piece of equipment with a rotating steel drum covered in tungsten carbide teeth.
Terrifying to picture, honestly.
Seriously. And it drives straight into the coalface, grinding the seam into pieces and gathering it onto a conveyor belt in one continuous motion.
And the efficiency differential there is the key factor. A single continuous miner machine, operated by just a handful of men, could extract more coal in one shift than dozens of manual miners.
Sometimes hundreds of pick and shovel miners.
Exactly. So the immediate result was just a massive labor surplus. The mining companies simply did not need the vast workforce they had before.
And the economic architecture of these coal towns made this crisis so much worse.
Oh, completely. Because many of these families lived in company towns.
Meaning they rented their actual homes from the mining company?
Right. And they were often paid in company scrip, not even U.S. dollars.
Wait, let's explain that for a second. So scrip could only be spent at the company store, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was basically private currency.
Yeah.
So when the machine replaces you, you don't just lose a weekly paycheck.
You lose your housing. You lose your ability to buy food at the only store in town.
And because you were paid in scrip rather than federal currency, you have zero accumulated savings to fall back on.
Wow. So it is a total, absolute economic collapse for the individual household.
Total collapse.
Hmm.
And looking at the agricultural data from the broader upland South, we see a parallel thing happening to farmers.
Right, because agriculture, especially cotton farming and subsistence agriculture, was going through its own mechanical revolution.
Exactly. The introduction of the mechanical cotton picker, plus the broader use of gasoline-powered tractors, meant landowners didn't need armies of sharecroppers anymore.
Or tenant farmers, right, they just didn't need the hand labor.
Yeah. So landowners just began consolidating their plots, evicting the tenant farmers, and relying on machinery.
Plus, the topsoil in a lot of these upland regions was severely depleted after decades of over-farming.
Which made subsistence agriculture nearly impossible anyway.
So we are looking at a scenario where the geography itself can just no longer support the population living there?
Right. These families weren't seeking some grand adventure. They were facing what the sociologists in our sources term an economic eviction.
An economic eviction. That is a heavy phrase.
It really is. The mountains and the hollows had essentially become a dead end.
But motion requires a destination. While the Southern economy was ejecting its workforce, the North was doing the exact opposite.
Yeah, the North was creating an artificial vacuum of just unprecedented size.
And the timing here is the critical element, isn't it?
Absolutely. The United States was gearing up for and then fully entering the Second World War.
Right. So the federal government is suddenly pouring billions of dollars into northern manufacturing centers.
They build the arsenal of democracy, yeah. The demand for industrial output just skyrocketed overnight.
We're talking bombers, tanks, artillery shells, rubber tires.
Everything needed to fight a global war.
To visualize this for you listening, just consider what was happening in Detroit. The auto plants weren't just hiring a few more guys to build sedans.
No, they were undergoing a complete structural overhaul.
Take the Willow Run plant, for example, built by Ford. From the monographs we read, they engineered an assembly line that was literally a mile long.
A full mile. And it was specifically designed to mass produce B-24 Liberator bombers.
And a B-24 is an incredibly complex machine. It has over 1 million individual parts.
Yeah, and their ultimate goal was to build those planes at a rate of 1 per hour.
Which is insane to think about.
Yeah.
One heavy bomber every 60 minutes.
And to do that, they required a workforce of over 40,000 people at that single facility.
Just massive scale. And Akron, Ohio presents a really similar picture, doesn't it?
It does. Akron was the rubber capital of the world. It was home to giants like Goodrich, Goodyear, and Firestone.
And the military needed millions of tires for jeeps, trucks, and aircraft.
Plus rubber components for gas masks, life rafts, you name it.
Right. And the steel mills and machine shops of the Ohio Valley cities like Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, and Dayton, they were all similarly tasked with running 24/7.
Producing all the raw materials and mechanical components for the war effort.
But here's the mechanical problem the North faced. They had the factories and they had the government contracts.
But their local labor pools were completely drained.
Because a massive percentage of the young, able-bodied male population of the North had been drafted into the military.
Exactly. So you have this extreme low economic pressure in the collapsing southern uplands.
Right.
And this intense high pressure of wartime industrial demand in the North.
It acts like a giant geographical vacuum cleaner.
That is a great way to put it.
The physical differential in economic pressure creates this draft that just pulls millions of people across the map.
And the physics of that economic draft are actually highly specific. The vacuum didn't pull people randomly across the continent.
Right, they didn't just scatter everywhere.
No, it pulled them along very established, concentrated geographic channels.
The physical highways themselves became the defining arteries of this whole demographic shift.
Yeah, and when you look at the maps of these historical records, 2 routes stand out prominently.
U.S. Route 23 and U.S. Route 25.
Exactly. U.S. 23 runs straight up out of the mountains, Kentucky, crosses the Ohio River at Ashland, and cuts north through the industrial corridor of Ohio.
All the way up into Michigan, right?
All the way up. And U.S. 25 similarly funneled traffic out of southeastern Kentucky towards Cincinnati and Detroit.
And the sheer volume of traffic on these specific 2-lane roads earned them a moniker that carries a lot of cultural weight.
The Hillbilly Highway.
Right. And naming a physical route the Hillbilly Highway really reveals how deeply the identity of these migrants became fused with the geography of their journey.
It really does. The oral histories from this period describe these roads as an almost continuous convoy.
Like bumper-to-bumper traffic.
Basically, yeah. And we have to consider the logistics of this movement. These were not modern air-conditioned SUVs driving on nice interstate highways.
Right, these were 1930s era automobiles, battered Fords and Chevrolets.
Or borrowed farm trucks.
And the sources describe these cars packed to the absolute structural limits of the suspension.
Oh, yeah. Family strapping mattresses, cast iron skillets, and whatever portable wealth they possessed right to the roof.
The journey itself was just a huge endurance test. You were driving this heavily loaded, underpowered vehicle up and out of steep mountain passes.
Dealing with overheating radiators, blown tires, and a lack of reliable service stations along the way.
Yeah, if you are listening to this and you've ever driven a long distance, strip away the rest stops, the GPS, and the reliability of a modern engine.
And imagine doing it with your entire life savings in your pocket and your whole family crammed into the back seat.
It is so stressful to even think about. But the network effects of this migration are highly documented in the labor records, too.
Right, because this was rarely a blind journey into the unknown. The pathways had actually been primed beforehand.
Oh, so?
Well, companies like Goodyear and Goodrich in Akron had actually sent recruiters down into West Virginia during the 1910s and 1920s.
Oh, wow. So way before the war.
Yeah, to find labor for the early rubber boom. So they established a precedent.
Ah, I see. So long before the B-24 bombers were being assembled, the pipeline already existed.
Exactly. A man from a specific hollow in West Virginia would travel to Akron, secure a job on the tire line, and find a boarding house.
And then the communication mechanism kicks in,
Right, he sends a letter back down to his brother, his cousins, and his former neighbors.
detailing the exact hourly wage he is making up north.
And the transition from a barter and scrip economy down south to a cash economy up north cannot be overstated here.
Right, earning a steady weekly cash wage was basically a revolutionary concept for families used to the company store.
Or the unpredictability of farming. That cash served as the ultimate proof of concept.
Word of mouth, backed by remittances sent home, became the most effective recruitment tool the northern industrialists had.
Way better than any newspaper ad. When the wartime boom hit, the established networks simply expanded exponentially.
So entire extended families and sometimes majority populations of small southern towns would effectively transplant themselves.
Right, directly into specific neighborhoods in Detroit or Akron.
Okay, so we have established the mechanics of the journey. You pack the car, you navigate the grueling miles up US 23, and you arrive at the hiring gate.
And from an economic standpoint, the transaction is immediate. You are hired.
But this brings us to the core contradiction we talked about at the start of the deep dive.
The paradox of the whole situation.
Exactly. Why were these specific migrants so highly desired by the employers, yet so deeply resented by the people living next door to them?
Right. Well, let's dissect the calculus of the northern factory managers first.
Okay, looking at the industrial archives, their hiring practices reveal a very specific set of biases.
They absolutely do. Factory managers actively preferred white southern migrants over other available labor pools.
And this preference was based on a series of really deeply ingrained stereotypes, wasn't it?
Yes. The primary assumption was one of mechanical aptitude.
Right. The logic of the foreman, according to the records, went something like this. If you grew up on a failing farm or in a coal camp, you had to learn how to keep broken machinery running.
Using whatever was lying around, yeah. You were perceived as a natural tinkerer.
So the employers assumed that a man who could jury-rig a broken tractor engine in a field could be easily trained to maintain a stamping press.
On an assembly line, exactly. It's a stereotype, but it drove their hiring.
Furthermore, employers ascribed a specific Protestant work ethic to these upland Southerners.
Right. They were viewed as independent, fiercely self-reliant, and just accustomed to grueling physical labor.
The managers believed these workers would be deferential to authority and willing to work long shifts without complaining.
But, the most significant factor in this whole transactional embrace was the employer's fear of organized labor.
Ah, right. The unions. The industrial climate of the 1930s in places like Detroit and the Ohio Valley was really tense.
It was defined by intense, often violent unionization efforts.
The workforce in these cities had historically been dominated by Eastern European immigrants and their children, right?
Yes, and they had been actively organizing the United Auto Workers and the United Rubber Workers.
The UAW and URW. And the industrialists were desperate to dilute this union power.
Very desperate. So the factory owners viewed the incoming white Southern migrants as an antidote to this union militancy.
Because these migrants came from isolated rural areas with little history of successful organized labor.
Exactly. And because they were perceived as highly individualistic, The employers assumed they would be naturally anti-union.
They thought they would serve as a compliant, easily managed workforce.
It is a fundamentally cynical calculation by management.
It really is. The industrialists aren't welcoming these families as fellow citizens or civic equals.
No, they are importing them as a strategic tool to undercut the bargaining power of the existing workforce.
They just wanted human machinery that wouldn't go on strike.
Exactly. But, the factory floor only occupies 8 to 12 hours of a migrant's day.
Right. When the shift ends and they walk out of the factory gates into the city, that transactional welcome totally evaporates.
That is where the reception from the urban locals, the people living in the apartments and houses next door, really begins.
And that's where the friction truly sparks. Because the sociological studies from the era document a bruising, deeply prejudiced reception.
Based entirely on class and regional origin.
The existing urban working class, many of whom had just recently secured their own precarious economic stability through those union contracts.
They viewed the migrants as a direct threat to that stability.
And this anxiety manifested as intense social ostracization, which really crystallized in the slur hillbilly.
Right. And we really need to analyze how that word functioned in 1943.
Because today, the term might be used affectionately within certain cultural contexts.
Or in country music, sure. But in the wartime industrial cities, it was weaponized.
It was a functional mechanism for exclusion.
Absolutely. The urban locals used very specific markers to identify and isolate the migrants.
And the most immediate marker was the accent, right?
Oh, immediately. The moment a migrant spoke, their regional origin was apparent, which triggered a cascade of negative assumptions.
The locals mocked their speech patterns, their vocabulary, their cadence.
And clothing was another primary marker. The rural attire of the migrants contrasted really sharply with urban fashion norms.
The sources show how this prejudice infiltrated just the basic mechanics of daily life. Like, consider the process of buying groceries during wartime.
Right, because the federal government had implemented a strict rationing system.
For essential goods like meat, sugar, and coffee, everyone was issued ration books containing stamps.
So a migrant mother goes to the local butcher to redeem her stamps.
And the process requires verbal interaction. The moment the butcher hears her southern drawl, the interaction often changes completely.
The oral histories recount butchers intentionally giving the worst cuts of meat to the migrants.
Or speaking down to them, or outright accusing them of trying to cheat the rationing system.
Simply because they were perceived as ignorant or dishonest based on their accent.
It's just infuriating to read, and the schools became another primary arena for this friction, too.
Yeah, migrant children were routinely bullied by their peers.
And in many documented cases, they were tracked into lower-tier vocational classes by teachers.
Teachers who just assumed their rural backgrounds equated to a lack of intellectual capacity.
It's so unfair. The urban locals actively blamed the migrants for the declining conditions of the city overall.
They scapegoated them for the spread of diseases, for the overcrowding of public bases.
And they associated them really strongly with crime and public disorder.
And to give you listening a concrete understanding of how pervasive this class prejudice was, we need to examine that 1953 Wayne State University survey.
Yes, let's talk about that, because this wasn't just anecdotal.
No, this was a formal sociological study conducted right in Detroit.
The researchers went out and asked a very direct question to the established residents of the city.
They asked, who do you consider to be the most undesirable people in Detroit?
And the methodology of the survey was designed to gauge social attitudes toward various demographic groups, right?
Exactly. And the results were incredibly revealing of the deep-seated animosity.
Because the group that ranked at the very top of the list of undesirables,
identified by 21% of the respondents,
was poor Southern whites.
And to really contextualize how severe that stigma was, they tied for the top position with criminals and gangsters.
Wow, just look at the psychological duality of that existence.
It's wild to think about.
You uproot your family, you travel hundreds of miles, and you take a grueling, dangerous job assembling heavy machinery that is literally fighting fascism overseas.
You are told by government propaganda that you are a vital part of the arsenal of democracy.
Yet, when you walk down the street in your own neighborhood, the people around you consider your social value to be equivalent to that of a mobster.
The cognitive dissonance must have been just overwhelming.
It really must have. The psychological toll of that continuous social friction was immense.
It was. However, to fully understand the dynamics of cities like Detroit during this era, we have to recognize that this friction did not occur in a vacuum.
Right. The white Southern migrants were not the only group moving into these cities.
And they weren't moving into empty space.
This is where the demographic collision becomes incredibly complex.
Because the wartime industrial boom was simultaneously pulling a massive influx of black Southern migrants.
Migrants who are fleeing the systemic violence and economic disenfranchisement of the Jim Crow South.
Exactly. So you have two massive streams of humanity white Southerners and black Southerners.
Frequently originating from the exact same states down south.
Pouring into the exact same northern cities at the exact same time.
To quantify this collision, we can look at Detroit's population data. Between 1941 and 1943, which is a window of roughly just 24 months.
The city absorbed an estimated 400,000 Southern migrants.
400,000, encompassing both black and white populations.
And the existing infrastructure of the city was completely incapable of handling this influx.
I mean, how could it? The most immediate crisis was housing.
Right. 400,000 people require beds, plumbing, shelter.
And because the federal government had restricted non-essential construction materials for the war effort, new housing developments were virtually non-existent.
They just weren't building houses. So the mechanics of this housing shortage created a shared extreme hardship for both groups of migrants.
Families were forced to find shelter wherever they could.
Which led to the proliferation of these massive trailer camps on the outskirts of the cities.
And from the sources, these were not like recreational vehicle parks.
No, not at all. They were squalid, muddy fields lacking basic sanitation infrastructure.
Hundreds of families would share a single communal water spigot and a bank of outhouses.
It was incredibly grim. Others rented what were called hotbeds in boarding houses.
Oh, right, where workers on different shifts would sleep in the same exact bed in rotation.
Yeah, one guy gets up to go to the factory, another guy comes back and gets right into the warm bed.
Just brutal. And families subdivided already cramped apartments, living in basements and attics.
So you had these two groups, both exhausted from the journey and the factory work, thrust together.
To compete fiercely for the exact same scarce resources.
The same beds in the trailer camps, the same spaces on the crowded streetcars.
And the same entry-level jobs on the assembly line.
But, and this is crucial, the sources demand that we draw a very careful objective distinction regarding their experiences.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
While they shared the geography of the slums and the trailer parks, the prejudice they face operated on fundamentally different mechanical levels.
The historical record is very explicit on this divergence.
The class and regional prejudice directed at the white migrants was brutal, and it caused genuine psychological and economic damage.
The hillbilly stigma was a powerful exclusionary force.
However, it functioned differently than the racial caste system that governed the lives of black migrants.
Let's use a spatial analogy to explain the mechanics of this difference, because I think it helps clarify things.
Okay, I'll lay it out.
Imagine two families arriving in Detroit on the exact same day in 1942. A white family from rural Tennessee and a black family from rural Alabama.
Okay, tracking.
They both secure entry-level jobs at the same munitions plant. And because housing is so scarce, they both end up living in the same muddy, overcrowded trailer camp.
Right, and they're earning the exact same weekly wage.
The critical divergence happens when both families attempt to leverage that wage for upward mobility.
When they try to get out of the trailer camp.
Exactly. For the white family, the trailer camp is a temporary starting line. They possess an invisible yet legally protected capacity for assimilation.
An invisible key.
Yes. As they accumulate savings from their factory wages, they have the legal right to purchase a home in a middle-class neighborhood.
And over time, their children will adopt the Midwestern accent, change their style of dress, and essentially blend into the broader white working class.
The white family's path out of the hillbilly stigma is difficult, but it is mechanically open.
Right. But the black family, holding the exact same amount of cash from the exact same factory job, faces a path that is legally closed.
Because the mechanism of closure was the restrictive covenant.
Right, let's explain restrictive covenants. These were clauses written directly into the property deeds of houses in many northern neighborhoods.
And these clauses explicitly prohibited the sale or rental of the property to anyone who was not of the Caucasian race.
It was baked right into the legal paperwork of the house.
Furthermore, the federal government itself, through the Homeowners Loan Corporation, utilized redlining.
Which was the practice of denying mortgages and financial services to neighborhoods based on their racial composition.
So the result is that black migrants were geographically hemmed in.
Regardless of their economic success, their hard work, or their savings.
They were legally confined to increasingly overcrowded, hyper-segregated districts within the city.
Like Detroit's Paradise Valley, right?
Exactly. The white migrant could assimilate out of their marginalization. The black migrant was structurally trapped.
This creates an incredibly volatile environment.
Just a powder keg. You have intense competition for limited resources, housing, jobs, public space.
And this competition is stoked by the existing prejudices of the urban locals against all the migrants.
And it is further inflamed by the racial prejudices the white Southerners brought with them from the Jim Crow South.
Right. And all of this is occurring within a systemic architecture that legally privileges one group's mobility over the others.
Even as they fight over the exact same entry-level necessities.
We are essentially describing the mechanics of pressure building inside a sealed container.
Hundreds of thousands of people suffering from sleep deprivation due to rotating factory shifts.
Dealing with food rationing.
Living on top of one another.
And experiencing constant friction over every single aspect of daily life.
And the historical data shows that this pressure did not dissipate naturally. It ruptured.
It exploded. The most catastrophic rupture occurred in Detroit in June of 1943.
The riots of 1943 were a complex event with multiple catalysts.
But the foundational cause was the fierce competition and intense overcrowding generated by this dual migration we've been discussing.
The city's physical geography simply could not accommodate the influx without friction.
And the mechanics of the riot highlight this friction perfectly, don't they?
They do. The inciting incident didn't happen in a factory. It happened in a recreation space.
Belle Isle. It was a public park in the Detroit River.
One of the very few places where working-class people, both black and white, went to escape the sweltering heat of the overcrowded tenements and trailer camps.
So on a Sunday evening, a minor altercation on the bridge connecting the island to the city escalated rapidly.
And rumors spread through the segregated neighborhoods at incredible speed.
In the white neighborhoods, rumors circulated that black men had attacked white women on the island.
While in the black neighborhoods, rumors circulated that white mobs had thrown a black woman and her baby off the bridge.
Neither rumor was true, but both served as the spark for all these underlying tensions.
The ensuing violence raged for 3 days. It resulted in 34 deaths, hundreds of injuries, and millions of dollars in property damage.
It finally required the deployment of federal troops to suppress it.
The 1943 riots demonstrate that the Hillbilly Highway did not exist in a vacuum.
Right. It intersected directly with the other massive demographic shifts of the era.
And the resulting impact altered the trajectory of these cities forever.
But if we pull back from the immediate violence and the daily friction of those war years, we need to examine the long-term legacy.
What did this massive influx of 7 million people actually build over the ensuing decades?
Well, the short-term achievement is historically undeniable. They provided the essential labor required to win a global war.
Without the physical output of those migrants in the factories of Detroit, Akron, and the Ohio Valley, the production quotas for the Allied forces would not have been met.
They literally built the arsenal of democracy. But the long-term historical arc reveals a profound cultural and political rewiring of the American North.
Yeah, the traditional narrative of immigration to a city is usually one of assimilation.
Right, you move to the city, and eventually the city changes you to fit its mold.
But the upland Southerners did something different.
Because their numbers were so vast and their settlements so concentrated, they didn't just assimilate.
They forced the northern cities to adapt to their culture.
Let's look at the mechanics of how this cultural transfer actually happened, starting with the music.
The transmission of country music is a perfect example of this cultural adaptation.
Because prior to this migration, what was then called hillbilly music was mostly a regional phenomenon.
Largely confined to the rural South and broadcast on smaller local radio stations.
But when the migrants moved north, they brought their instruments. The fiddle, the steel guitar, the mandolin.
And they brought their demand for the music that connected them to home.
They essentially created their own cultural infrastructure. Because they were excluded from the established social clubs of the urban locals, they just built their own.
Honky-tonks and bars catering specifically to Southern migrants sprang up rapidly in the industrial neighborhoods of Chicago, Cincinnati, and Detroit.
These became the main social hubs of the displaced communities.
And the broadcast industry recognized this massive new demographic and adapted accordingly.
Right. Radio stations in the Midwest, such as WCKY in Cincinnati, began broadcasting country music at 50,000 watts.
Reaching the entire industrial corridor.
And the lyrical themes of the music itself evolved too, didn't they?
They really did. It shifted from traditional mountain ballads to songs that reflected their new reality.
Songs about the pain of homesickness, the grind of the factory floor, and just the struggles of urban life.
It parallels the development of the Bakersfield sound in California, which was driven by the Dust Bowl migration.
Oh, that's a great point. The Hillbilly Highway created a massive permanent market for country music in the industrial Midwest.
Establishing a cultural footprint that remains deeply entrenched today.
And this adaptation wasn't limited to entertainment. It fundamentally altered the religious landscape as well.
Right. The sociological sources highlight a really deep disconnect between the migrants and the religious institutions of the North.
Because the mainline Protestant churches in cities like Detroit were generally formal, hierarchical, and quiet in their worship style.
But to the migrants, who were accustomed to the highly emotional, charismatic, and egalitarian traditions of rural evangelical and Pentecostal worship.
These northern churches felt completely alien and unwelcoming.
So just as they built their own bars, they built their own churches.
You see the rapid emergence of storefront churches.
Right. A migrant with a calling to preach would just rent an abandoned retail space on a city street.
Set up some folding chairs and hold services that replicated the religious experience of the mountain hollows.
They maintained their spiritual autonomy and created powerful support networks that operated entirely outside the established religious hierarchy of the city.
That is fascinating. Finally, we really must examine the political transformation.
Because the initial calculation by the factory owners that these migrants would serve as a docile anti-union workforce proved to be a profound misjudgment.
A huge miscalculation. The sources reveal a fascinating evolution here.
While they may have initially distrusted the established unions, which were heavily populated by the urban locals who despised them,
The migrants eventually realized that their economic survival depended on collective bargaining.
but they engaged with the unions entirely on their own terms.
They adapted their fierce rural independence and their historical grievances against the exploitative coal company bosses into a potent form of industrial militancy.
They became heavily involved in the massive wave of post-war labor strikes.
They were frequently the instigators of wildcat strikes, which are unauthorized work stoppages.
Demonstrating a total willingness to halt production when they felt their specific rights were being violated on the factory floor.
Sometimes defying both management and their own union leadership at the same time.
They really synthesized a brand new political identity.
They became fiercely loyal to the economic protections of the labor unions, voting consistently to protect their wages and benefits.
Yet they retained many of the traditional conservative social values of their rural upbringing.
And this specific synthesis forged an entirely new demographic category.
The urban white working class of the post-war North.
That is the ultimate legacy of the demographic shift we have explored today.
The movement of 7 million people up US 23 and 25 relieved the overwhelming economic pressure on the failing rural South and provided the necessary fuel for the industrial North.
But in the process, the migrants carved out a distinct cultural and political space that permanently altered the trajectory of the American Midwest.
It really did.
To bring this all together, if you are listening to this, I encourage you to look at a modern map of the American Rust Belt.
When you hear discussions about the specific political grievances of the working class in Ohio or Michigan,
Or when you notice the deep roots of country music and evangelical religion in those northern industrial corridors,
recognize that much of what we define as northern working class culture was actually imported.
it is the lasting echo of the Hillbilly Highway.
We started this deep dive with the mission of understanding a massive displacement.
We looked at the mechanics of continuous miners destroying a rural economy, the vacuum of the wartime auto plants, the grueling journey north.
And the deeply prejudiced reception that forced these migrants to forge a new identity.
I will leave you with this final thought to consider. How much of the political and cultural divides we see in the Midwest today are not modern phenomena at all, but are the direct, lingering descendants of those 7 million rural Southerners?
People who drove north, desperately trying to build a life in a city that eagerly demanded their hands, but fundamentally rejected their humanity.
A vital perspective that reshapes our understanding of how the modern map was drawn. Thanks for diving deep with us.